He was repairing an orc girl's armor. Then she whispered, "Go ahead." The orc girl was bleeding out, and still strong enough to crush his wrist. Edrin had barely stepped off the road when he heard the crash. By the time he reached her, she was already on one knee, armor caved in at the chest, breath ragged, blade half buried in the mud beside her. Not a common fighter, not a wanderer. Everything about her screamed danger and importance. "Don't move," he said, already reaching for the broken plate digging into her wound. Her hand snapped up and locked around his wrist. Fast, brutal, even dying. She could kill him. Her eyes lifted, sharp, furious, unbroken. For a moment they just stared at each other, human and orc, stranger and threat. Then she leaned closer, breath hot with pain, voice low and controlled. "Go ahead, human, not trust, not..." "Mercy!" A warning. Edrin swallowed, fingers hovering over the cracked armor pressed into her flesh. If he touched it wrong, she would die. If he didn't, she might still kill him, and somewhere in the dark behind them, something was already coming. Edrin did not think. Men like him survived by knowing when to keep walking, when not to get involved, when to let trouble belong to someone richer, stronger, or more foolish. But that night, with the rain turning the path to black sludge and the wounded orc girl barely holding herself upright, he did the one thing common sense would never forgive. He hauled her onto his mule cart and covered her with a torn wool tarp. The journey back to his cabin felt endless. Every jolt of the wheels made her grunt through clenched teeth. Twice she woke enough to reach for a weapon that was no longer in her hand. Once she grabbed the cart's side so hard the old wood cracked under her fingers. Edrin said very little after that. He only kept walking, head down, hands cold on the reins, praying no one from the village saw what he was dragging through the storm. His home sat beyond the last fields, where poor men and unwanted work were easiest to ignore. It was part forge, part cabin, built from old timber, patched roof boards, and the stubbornness of his dead father. Inside there was one narrow bed, one rough table, stacks of scrap metal, tools hanging on pegs, and the stale smell of smoke, iron, and old winters. Nothing in that place had ever looked noble. Then he brought her in. She seemed too large for the room, too sharp, too alive. Even wounded, she changed the shape of it. Her armor was dark, heavy, and finely made beneath the damage. The metal was marked with deep-cut symbols Edrin did not recognize at first, but he knew quality when he saw it. No mercenary wore steel like that. No forgotten traveler carried herself with that kind of command. When he tried to cut the chest, blade loose, she caught his sleeve with a fierce look. "No tricks," she muttered. Edrin almost laughed from nerves. "Lady, if I had tricks, I wouldn't live like this." That made her pause. He cleaned the blood as best he could, boiled water, tore his last clean shirt into bandages, and worked in silence while she watched him as if deciding whether he was a healer or a fool. Her hand never strayed far from the dagger he had placed just out of reach, where she could see it. Outside, the storm began to thin. Inside, Edrin finally turned the damaged breastplate toward the firelight and saw the crest. Stamped beneath the mud, his hands went still. He had seen that mark once before on a dead soldier's shield, years ago, and men had whispered about it like a prayer and a threat. Edrin did not mention the crest. He set the breastplate down beside the forge and forced his hands to move again, slowly, carefully, as if he had not just recognized the mark of a powerful orc war clan in the middle of his own miserable cabin. If she noticed the change in his face, she said nothing. She only leaned back against the wall, pale with pain, and kept watching him through narrowed eyes. "You need the armor off," he said. "You need courage," she replied. He exhaled once through his nose. That too. The answer seemed to surprise her. It took the better part of an hour to free her from the damaged chest piece without tearing the wound open again. The metal had bent inward hard enough to bruise deep around her ribs. Once, When he had to pull a jagged edge away from her skin, her breath caught sharply and her fingers closed around the side of the bed frame until the wood groaned. But she did not cry out. Orc pride, Edrin thought. Either that or pure stubbornness. When the armor finally came away, he understood just how close to death she had been. The blow had not pierced her heart, but it had carved a brutal line beneath her collar and across the upper chest, then driven the plate inward. Bruising had spread dark beneath her green skin. The shoulder wound was ugly too, deep and half-clotted. Edrin boiled more water, crushed the last of his dried herbs into a paste, and cleaned the blood as gently as he could. She hissed once and caught his wrist again. "You touch me like I will break," she said. "No," Edrin answered without looking up. "I touch you like you're already broken." For the first time, she had no reply. He wrapped the wound, tied, the bandage firm, and stepped back. She looked smaller somehow sitting there without the armor, though she was still bigger than him by a head and broad enough to fill half the room. Strength had not left her. But now he could see the cost of it. He gave her broth after that, thin and plain, made from the last bone stock in his pot. She stared into the cup. "This is food?" "It is, if you want to keep breathing." "In my clan," she muttered. "This would be fed to dogs." "In my house," he said, "dogs eat worse." She looked at him for a long second, then drank it anyway. That became the rhythm of the next 2 days. Rain tapped the roof. The forge warmed the room. Edrin repaired harness, buckles and farm blades by daylight, and turned to her armor whenever the fire burned hot enough. He hammered dents from the chest plate, reshaped bent edges, replaced torn leather straps, and worked soot into his hands until even his knuckles looked charred. Every so often he checked her bandages, changed the cloth, and made sure fever had not taken hold. She was difficult from the first hour to the last. She tried standing too early. He had to catch her by the arm when her legs gave way. She hated that. Her glare after nearly knocked him backward harder than her weight had. "You are wounded," he told her. "I am delayed. You're impossible." Her mouth shifted slightly at that. Not quite a smile, but close enough that he noticed. At night he slept on a blanket near the forge with a hammer beside him. He did not trust the world enough to do otherwise. The first night she saw it and said nothing. The second night she looked at the hammer, then at him. "You think I'll kill you in your sleep?" "I think I picked up a hunted orc in the dark and brought her into my home," he said. "Caution seems reasonable." A beat passed. Then she said, "Reasonable." That one word changed something. Not trust. Not yet. But the sharpest edge between them grew less certain. On the third evening, Edrin woke at the workbench with his neck stiff and the fire low. He had fallen asleep while shaping the inner curve of her chest plate. For one confused second, he thought he was alone. Then he saw her. She was awake on the bed, sitting upright with a blanket over one shoulder, feeding. Split pieces of wood into the fire with slow, careful movements. Her face was turned toward the flames. The light softened the hard lines of her expression and caught the old scars along her arms. She had likely been watching him for some time. "You should have slept," he murmured. "You were freezing," she answered. It was such a simple thing that he almost missed it. An orc warrior, proud and wounded, keeping his fire alive while he slept. Edrin looked away first and reached for the half-finished armor piece before she could see the effect it had on him. Then, as he lifted the repaired plate, he noticed something through the small, fogged window beside the forge. Tracks, large ones, fresh ones, not from the village, not from any animal he knew, and they stopped just beyond the tree line, as if whoever made them had already found the cabin. Edrin did not go outside. He stood by the window for a long moment, staring at the fresh tracks half hidden by mud and thinning rain, then quietly pulled the curtain of old cloth across the glass. "What is it?" she asked. He kept his voice low. Someone came close. Her face changed at once. Not fear exactly. Something tighter, more focused. How many? I only saw one set. That means there were more. He turned to her. You know that for certain? I know how warriors hunt. The room felt smaller after that. Edrin fed more coal into the forge, more for the sound than the heat. She pushed herself upright. On the bed, jaw hard, eyes fixed on the door, as if willing her body to be stronger than it was. He could see the effort it cost her just to sit there like a fighter instead of a patient. You're not going anywhere tonight, he said. I may have no choice. You do if I bar the door. That almost brought back the old sharpness in her, but it faded quickly. You think wood will stop what follows me? No, he said, but it might buy time. For a while neither spoke. The fire cracked. Wind pressed wet branches against the outer wall. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked from the village, and then fell silent. It was she who broke the quiet. In your world, she said, still watching the door, do humans always live alone like this? Edrin let out a short breath. Only the lucky ones. That made her glance toward him. You call this luck? He looked around the cabin, the patched roof, the worn tools, the narrow bed she had taken over without asking. No one here waits for me to fail, he said. That already makes it better than some places. She said nothing to that, but the question had opened something. Later, while he changed the bandage near her shoulder, she did not stop him when his fingers brushed old scars crossing her back. These were not fresh wounds. They were older, cleaner, deliberate, the kind left by training, punishment, or survival. He noticed her body tense. You don't have to ask, she said quietly. I know what you saw. Edrin tied the cloth carefully. Then I won't insult you by pretending I didn't. Her eyes remained on the fire. In my clan, weakness is corrected early. The words were simple, but the silence after them was not. He sat back on his heels. That's what they called it? Her mouth hardened. That is what they still call it. For the first time since dragging her into the cabin, Edrin felt something stronger than caution. Anger. Not at her. At whoever had taught someone like her to speak of pain as if it were duty. He rose, crossed to the table, and poured the last of the warm broth into a cup. When he handed it to her, she took it without complaint this time. After a moment, she asked, And you? What corrected you? Edrin gave a dry laugh. Nothing so grand. Hunger, cold, being born too low to matter, the usual human lessons. That is not small. It is where I come from. She studied him over the rim of the cup. You speak as if no one ever chose you. The bluntness of it landed harder than he expected. He turned back to the forge so she would not see his face too clearly. No one important, he said. The answer stayed between them longer than either seemed comfortable with. The next morning brought more than tracks. A rider from the village appeared near midday. Tovin, the blacksmith who sometimes bought Edrin's repaired hinges and sometimes mocked the state of his boots. He did not dismount. He only sat outside the fence with rain on his shoulders and looked far too interested in the cabin. You've gone quiet these past days, Tovin called. Folks say they saw a cart on the hill road in the storm. Edrin wiped soot from his hands and stepped outside, keeping the door mostly shut behind him. Folks should worry more about their own leaking roofs. Tovin smirked. Maybe, but they also heard shouting from out here. Big voice for such a small house. Inside, Edrin could feel her presence even without looking back, motionless, listening. She's not from the village, Tovin said, eyes narrowing. Who've you got in there? No one who concerns you. That was the wrong answer. Tovin's expression shifted from amusement to suspicion. Be careful, Edrin. Men disappear for less than hiding trouble. He finally rode off, but not before glancing once toward the tree line beyond the cabin, where the fresh tracks had been. When Edrin stepped back inside, she was already trying to rise. "No," he said sharply. "If the village starts talking, I am the trouble now. You were always the trouble." A strange flicker crossed her face. "And yet you kept me." He had no answer ready for that. By dusk, the pressure in the air had changed. Even the fire seemed restless. Edrin was tightening a newly cut leather strap to the repaired chest armor when she spoke again, her voice lower than usual. "There is something you should know." He looked up. She was standing now despite the pain, one hand braced on the table, the forge light catching the harsh beauty of her face and the exhaustion beneath it. "When they come," she said, "some will kneel." Edrin's hands went still on the armor strap. "And some," she finished, eyes fixed on his, "will come to finish what they started." Edrin did not get the chance to ask what she meant. Horn sounded from beyond the trees, low, deep, orc-made. It rolled across the wet hills like a warning pulled from the throat of a beast, and the effect on her was immediate. She straightened despite the pain, every trace of weakness buried under something older and colder than injury. Edrin had seen her dangerous before. He had never seen her become untouchable. Then came movement outside. Not one rider, not two, many. Heavy, footfalls, harness chains, the sharp snort of war mounts, human voices shouting from farther down the road as men from the village pulled back towards safer ground. Someone pounded once on Edrin's door hard enough to shake the frame. "Open in the name of the Iron Banner." Edrin looked at her. "Iron Banner?" Her jaw tightened. That was answer enough. He opened the door only a hand's width at first, and what he saw made his stomach drop. Orc warriors filled the clearing, armored and disciplined, bearing black-red standards marked with the same crest he had seen beneath the mud on her breastplate. Not raiders, not mercenaries, elite clan guard. At their front stood an older orc, in scaled armor, one eye clouded white, a ceremonial axe on his back. He did not look at Edrin like a man. He looked at him like a hinge in the way of a gate. Then the old warrior dropped to one knee. So did the others, all at once. The clearing bowed. Behind Edrin, the room went still. "My lady," the old warrior said, head lowered. "Daughter of Gorza, heir of the Ashen Fang, warblood of the Southern Holds, we have searched without sleep." The words hit Edrin harder than any blow. He turned slowly. She stood in the forge light, wounded and bare of title for the last several days, and yet somehow the room now bent around what she truly was. Not a noble, not merely important, an heir, a woman born so far above him that even the air between them suddenly felt different. Her false name, her silence, the quality of her armor, the way she had borne pain like command itself. It all snapped into place at once. "You lied," Edrin said. It came out quieter than he meant it to. Her eyes flicked to him. "I hid what would have killed you sooner." Outside, another voice spoke, smooth, controlled, dangerous. Or perhaps what would have made him sell you faster. A second group entered the clearing from the far side, also orcs, but wearing different insignia, grey iron, wolf-marked shields. Rivals. Their arrival shifted the air from rescue to standoff in a heartbeat. The speaker was tall, even for an orc, broad-shouldered, draped in command, with the calm face of someone used to deciding who lived and who disappeared. He smiled when he saw her, but there was no warmth in it. "Lady Tharaka," he said, "your survival has complicated many plans." Edrin felt the name strike him too. Tharaka. Now she had a real name, and it belonged to the kind of stories poor. Human men were never meant to touch. The one-eyed commander rose, hand on weapon. "Step back, Varrock." Varrock only smiled wider. "I came to escort my future ally home." Tharaka's expression turned to iron. "I would sooner walk into fire." So that was part of it too. Politics, marriage, power. Edrin's cabin, the place where he patched pans and boiled turnips, had become a battlefield for clan succession in less than a minute. Human voices sounded from farther down the road, villagers, militia, afraid and gathering. If steel was drawn here, the entire valley could go up in blood. Varroc's gaze slid past Tharaka and landed on Edrin. This human sheltered you. No one answered. Varroc studied the repaired chest armor on the table, the bloodied bandages, the forge, the signs of long and careful work. Something ugly and amused passed across his face. "How intimate," he said. Edrin felt heat rise in his chest, not shame exactly, but a sharp and helpless fury. He had cleaned her wounds, fed her, stayed awake repairing the armor that had nearly become her coffin, and now, in the mouth of power, all of it sounded small, dirty, ridiculous. Tharaka stepped forward at once, voice like a drawn blade. "You speak of him again, and I will split your tongue from your mouth." Silence followed. Even Varroc's smile thinned. For one dangerous second, Edrin saw both women she had been in his cabin and the one she truly was. The wounded stranger who kept his fire alive while he slept. And this force strong enough to make armed warriors rethink their next breath. It should have pulled him toward her. Instead, it pushed him back, because suddenly he could see the whole cruel shape of it. He was not standing beside a hunted woman. He was standing between clans, bargains, bloodlines, and war. And in that world, a man like him was not a person. He was leverage. He looked at her, really looked. And the hurt in him turned colder than anger. "You should have told me," he said. Tharaka's face changed, only slightly, but enough. "I wanted one place," she said, "where I was not my name." The truth of it hurt more than another lie. Would have. Outside, weapons shifted. The rival banners edged closer. The human militia was nearing the road. Everything was tightening, and Edrin realized, with a sick twist in his stomach, that whoever had struck her down on the road had not failed. They had only driven her into the one place no one expected her to be. His home. And now every enemy she had was standing at his door. The first blade came out on the rival side. That was all it took. The one-eyed commander moved at once. Tharaka stepped between both factions before anyone else could strike, her injured shoulder pulling tight beneath. The bandages Edrin had wrapped with his own hands. Even hurt, she looked terrifying. Her voice cut across the clearing like iron breaking. "No blood on this ground," Varroc laughed once. "You still give orders as if nothing has changed." "Everything has changed," she said. "That is why you will listen." Then, before Edrin could understand what she was doing, she reached to the table beside the door and lifted the repaired chest armor. The same piece he had hammered straight by Firelight while she slept. The same armor she had nearly died inside. She turned, faced her own warriors, the rival clan, and the frightened human men gathering down the road. Then she held the armor out toward Edrin. A murmur rippled through the orcs at once. For a second he did not move. He did not understand, not until the one-eyed commander lowered his head again, not in command this time, but in shock. Among orcs, armor given into another's hands was not a small thing. Armor over the heart was sacred, personal, binding. Tharaka's eyes never left Edrin's. "This human repaired what my enemies tried to break," she said, voice carrying across. "The clearing. He sheltered me when death was close. He touched my weakness and did not use it against me. He saw me wounded and did not turn away." Varroc's smile disappeared. Tharaka stepped closer. "So let all of you hear me clearly." The wind pressed through the trees. No one spoke. "I offer him my protection," she said, "my household, my land. A place beside me that no one here will challenge without answering to my blade." The clearing seemed to tilt beneath Edrin's feet. She was not done. "If he chooses it," she said, lower now but somehow more powerful, I offer him my future too." That landed like thunder. A human man, a poor one. In front of clans, banners, soldiers and villagers. No secrecy, no shame. No soft arrangement hidden in private rooms. A real offer. One that could change both their lives and set half the region talking by sunrise. Edrin stared at her, unable to breathe for a moment. Part of him wanted to step forward that instant. Part of him wanted to run, because this was not just love. It was cost. It was exile from the small, bitter world that had at least been familiar. It was walking into halls where people stronger, richer, and older than him would see a human craftsman, standing where no human had any right to stand. It was being judged every day, tested every day. It was never again being invisible, but perhaps never again being at peace. "And when they look at me beside you," he asked, voice rough, "what will they see?" Tharaka did not answer too quickly. That, more than anything, told him she understood. "Some will see weakness," she said. "Some will see insult. Some will see a story they were taught cannot be true." She stepped one pace closer. "But I will see the man who held my life in his hands and did not close his fingers." Something in Edrin broke then, not cleanly, not neatly, but enough. He looked at the villagers on the road, at the rivals who would hate this, at the clan, warriors waiting for permission to accept or reject what stood before them. Then he looked back at her, at the wound under the bandage, at the armor he had repaired, at the woman who had come into his cabin like a threat and somehow become the first person who had ever truly chosen him. Slowly, with every eye on him, Edrin reached for the armor in her hands, not to keep it, to lift it. His fingers found the fastening straps by instinct. He stepped close enough to feel the heat of her breath, close enough to hear the silence around them strain and shake. Then he fastened the chest piece back over her heart. "I won't be carried," he said quietly, but clearly enough for all of them to hear. "If I stand beside you, it will be on my own feet." For the first time since the horn sounded, something softened in Tharaka's face. Not victory, not relief alone, something deeper. "Then stand," she said. And this time, when he did, he stood beside her. The clearing did not erupt into peace. It tightened first. Varrok's warriors shifted, angry and insulted. The human militia stood frozen on the road, caught between fear and disbelief. Tharaka's own guard looked as if they were watching traditions split open in front of them. For one dangerous breath, it seemed that love, pride, and politics would all end in blood anyway. Then the one-eyed commander stepped forward, struck his fist against his chest, and bowed his head. Not to Edrin, not fully, but enough. That was all the opening the rest needed. One by one, Tharaka's warriors followed, not all with warmth, not all with acceptance, but with obedience. And for that day, obedience was enough to stop a war from beginning in the mud outside a poor human cabin. Varrok did not kneel. He left with a promise in his eyes that this insult would not be forgotten. That was the cost of what had happened. Tharaka's offer had protected Edrin, but it had also turned him into a target inside a world that never would have noticed him otherwise. And the human village never forgave him fully. To them, he had not risen. He had crossed a line men like him were supposed to die beneath. So Edrin left. He left the broken cabin, the patched roof, the forge where his father had taught him to straighten bent iron instead of throwing it away. He carried only his tools, a few clothes, and the life he could no longer return to. What waited for him among the Ashen Fang was no easy welcome. Some orcs mocked him openly. Some refused to eat at the same fire. Others watched him with cold curiosity, waiting for weakness, for failure, for proof that Tharaka had lost judgment along with blood. He learned quickly that being chosen by a powerful woman did not make a man powerful. It only made him visible. So he did what he had always done. He worked. He repaired split mail, refitted saddle plates, mended ceremonial armor, too old and sacred. for careless hands. He listened more than he spoke. He earned what little space he was given, one task at a time. It was slower than any grand gesture, harder too, but it was real, and Tharaka changed with him. She did not become softer in battle, or smaller in command. The clan still feared her temper and respected her strength. But those closest to her began to see something new, a leader who no longer treated tenderness as weakness or quiet loyalty as something lesser than force. The old cruelty of her world did not vanish, but in her hall it began, little by little, to lose ground. Their love was never easy. It cost Tharaka alliances she had been expected to secure. It cost Edrin the last illusion that he could live unseen and untouched by power. It cost them both the simpler futures they might have survived without ever truly living. But what replaced those futures was something earned. Months later, on the morning of the first thaw, Edrin stood in the private armory of her stronghold, while pale spring light spilled over racks of steel and bronze. Tharaka stood before him in silence, taller than anyone in the room had a right to be. Her armor opened at the chest, not broken this time, waiting. He lifted the repaired breastplate, the same one that had almost become her grave, the same one he had rebuilt with blistered hands in a lonely cabin no one had cared about. The dents were gone now, the cracks were sealed. But if he tilted it just right, he could still see the faint line where the metal had once nearly split. He fastened it over her heart. Her hand closed over his wrist, just as it had that first night in the storm. Only now, there was no threat in. She leaned down, forehead nearly touching his, and her voice, when it came, was quiet enough to belong only to him. "Go ahead, human." This time he smiled before answering, and when they walked out together, orc and human, war and warmth, power and patience, the world still stared, but it no longer looked impossible.